Hello, my name is Lizzie Karen and welcome to the channel I've created on my dreams of Atlantis. I'm continuing on the subject of education and this is part 3 of a series on education, and in the previous episodes I've talked to you about childhood and education around those aspects, and I promised that I'd get back and do an episode on the 12 formal educational institutes and their 10 locations. I know it's taken me a little bit of time to do this episode, and that's partly because one of those institutes or one of the universities is kind of so weird in my dreams that I was a little reluctant to put it into an episode yet, but for the sake of completeness, I will explain that university, and there are dreams to come where I am at that university, and there's some of the really weirdest dreams that I can remember, but they are amazing dreams because the university I'm speaking of is called Lim. But I will tell you more about that place on another occasion. So let's get on with the episode, Education in Atlantis, Part 3. So the first of the institutions that I attended was the Great Institute in Tantal. It was for the study and betterment of numbers, maths, measurement, and time. So the excitement of going to my first university was immense. I have a lovely dream memory of my first day. I had visited the institute many times, as it was the home of my brother, Uran. It was called the Great Institute because it was the first of its kind. My people had never before approached education in such a formal manner. So when we moved from our village to the new city of Tantal, or Atlantis as we know it today, it was the only educational facility. All topics were covered in those days, but within a period of maybe about 6 years, it was obvious that one university wasn't enough, and so it started to be split off one by one into the 12 institutions. It took a while to set up all the institutions, but luckily they were all ready for when I had gone through my educational process. The Great Institute wasn't named after a place or a person because it was the first one, so it just stuck with the name, the Great Institute. Most other institutions were named after one of the leaders of that institution. The Great Institute was led by 3 people. 1 female, 2 males. The female was called She. It's a nice coincidence, I guess. And she was the main one in charge. Her colleagues were Sut and Belach of Kron. Belach of Kron was later to become famous in Tantal for the overthrow of Uran, but that's another story. When I started at the Great Institute, I was still living with my parents nearby on the Central Island. It was so close that I walked out of my front door, down the main road, past the fountain, and straight into the university, less than 5 minutes. Even though I was 20, I had no desire to leave home at that time, and my parents were happy enough to let me stay. Each night, I would return home full of questions and all kinds of comments about what I'd learnt that day. The study of numbers and measurement, including the measurement of time, was considered the key foundation for all other studies. Without the mastery of numbers, it wouldn't be possible to grasp the specifics for such things as medicine, architecture, building, energy, etc. Hence, this was the first of the institutions that one was required to attend. This institution was also where Uran lived. Even after he handed over the institute to its new leaders, he continued to reside there right up until the time he was ousted. He was located to one side of the building and on the water's edge. So the whole building was really large and lovely. It was white and red, 3 stories, and parallel on the middle ring island was the Arts and Enjoyment Institute, which was a long, thin building which took up the full width of the middle island. A walkway went between the 2 buildings. It also had a walkway from there to the outer ring, where the 3rd University of Tantal was located, which was the University of Medical Studies, and it also doubled as the equivalent of a hospital. So each day I would get up, no alarm clock, it just seemed to happen. Or maybe my parents were subtly my alarm clock. But anyway, I'd get ready, eat, and then walk to my class. The library in the main building was full of actual physical books when I first started studying, but later on, most of the books that we used were electronic, but that's another story as well. Everyone had their own copy of a book called Core Knowledge, and we would also keep our own journals of the things that we learnt. Each of the 3 leaders had their own specialty, and they certainly enjoyed teaching their specialty. I did wonder where all the books came from when I started, because we'd only been in the new city of Tantal for 7 years, and I remember Uran had many books when I was growing up. And there was a library in the village before we moved to Tantal, but it was small. So I don't actually know how the book population grew so suddenly. It was a very small time frame. I feel that I am actually missing something in my dreams, but I have no idea what it is. But it's just a bit of a weird thing that I noticed. Anyway, the library was a place I really loved to go. I'd spend many happy hours there just reading. You couldn't remove any books. They all had to stay in the library, and so people would read them while they sat in the big comfortable chairs. This all sounds a bit boring, but I guess maybe it was a bit. But as far as dreams go, it was very relaxing and extremely pleasant. However, nothing of any great event happened during the 10 years that I was studying there. It was a simple, happy time. I had several friends the same age, and we'd hang out together. I'd spend time with my brother on occasion, but really, that was 10 years where nothing really happened. Once my time there was complete, I was required to move to the next university. It was the Institute of Theoretical Energy in a place called Perri, named after the leader of the institute, Perri. For the first time, I was out of my comfort zone. I had to move out of the house I lived in with my parents, and I was assigned my own apartment in the university building. The whole place was a long way from home, and I felt a strange hollow feeling being away from my family and away from Tantal. Tantal was so full of life, and yet Perri was so quiet and so small, and it was in the middle of nowhere. There was really nothing much to do there except study. I was 30 years old at this point and had been very happy up until this time. My dreams of this time are, well, not quite such happy ones, but hey, I threw myself into my studies and just tried to keep myself from feeling too sad. Back to the studies. This was the university for the study of light, sound, vibrations, gravity, and physics, basically energy. The university was cold and small and not particularly inviting, but I never complained, but I just didn't like it much. I've tried to work out where this place might have been. It was well outside the temperate zone and definitely towards the north. I'm thinking Russia or maybe the Arctic Circle, but I'm not sure. I don't know really. I don't really have a good idea of where it was. All I can say is it was cold, really cold. I completed my time there, and although the work and the study was really interesting, I couldn't wait to move to the next university. The next one was the Institute of Applied Energy, not theoretical. This is where we got to put all the knowledge that we'd earned to good use. Different types of energy were useful in different practical ways and applications. This field covered many of the things that benefited the lifestyle of the Tantals. The focus was on the use of energy, like in flight or submergence or lifting things, manufacturing things, communications, all those sorts of things. The location was lovely, set on a lush tropical style area next to a beautiful river. The place was called Kem, or it was really pronounced in my dreams more like Keum. But it's too hard for me to say, so I'll stick with the anglicised version that I have chosen. This was Egypt, long before the Egyptians ever lived there. There were two leaders. One was female by the name of Asat, and a male called Eru. They were wonderful teachers. Everything felt like fun. I felt like I really achieved a lot at Kem, but at the time, there were many inventions happening. It was like a constant series of bang, 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 one invention after another, because everything was so new, and it was a time that it was really, really exciting to be there when there was so much going on. I had a good 10 years there. I learnt a lot, I created a lot, and I had a lot of fun. And I was sad to be moving on, but my next university was a total change of pace. Tehut was a sublimely peaceful place. It was the University of Alchemy and Philosophy, and it was run by Tehut. Obviously, they named the place after him. It was a strange kind of combination of philosophical thought combined with the study of the Earth's resources, like the properties of gold and gems and minerals and chemistry and those sorts of things in general. Where I think it was is somewhere in South America, because it was high altitude and yet it was quite green. It wasn't hot, but it was rarely too cold either. It was quite a long trip to get there from Tantal, and it was over a wide ocean, which I assume was the Atlantic. Most of the time we just sat around theorizing over this and that and the other thing. Then one of us would get some idea about something and off we would go to test it out. It was actually a wonderful 10 years, but by the end of the time I was actually quite ready to leave. Next step was Neb. It was a strangely insular place. It was tucked away in a small valley, and the buildings were all carved into the red-coloured bedrock around the valley. The centre was in the main square. There were no plants within the town, but there were large trees all around at the outskirts of the town on the hills. The university itself was cut into the hill, so it stretched up the hill from the square, from the town square. So it was all very much interlinked. Everything came off the square. Even though it was a very dark place, I mean, the buildings were all a dark red colour, and because it was nestled in a valley, it was often shaded. Even though it was quite dark. It was actually had a very friendly feeling. It had a great community through it. By that I mean it had a real community feel about it. It was a great place. As a student, we were up and off on excursions constantly as part of our training and study. It was a more adventurous lifestyle than any of the others I had had while studying at universities. And this place is the first place I fell in love. I'd reached 60 years old by this stage, and I'd been in relationships, but never deeply in love. Problem was that it was one of the lecturers that I fell for, and that is so very inappropriate, even at the age of 60 years old. I really felt like it was reciprocated, but nothing ever happened between us. I did return there to work after my education was completed, but that is another story. I really enjoyed the place. The machines we got to use at NEB were amazing. This university housed the great machines for mining. There weren't many of these machines, but they were so efficient that we really didn't need many of them. And some of them were pretty scary looking as well. There were two leaders, Neb, who obviously the place was named after, and Peter here. We got to work on various homes, on libraries, tombs, all sorts of architecture all over Tantal and at other locations. And the place itself was somewhere north of Tantal. It was an area a little bit cold and wet, mainly wet, and I'm not sure where it might have been. But it was a good place, and I enjoyed it. So I was fairly sad to finish my time there, not just because of my favourite teacher, but also because I really enjoyed the place, all the travelling and the work we did. Next stop was Peyossa, or Peos, the Institute of Water. What an unusual place this was. It was quite a long way away from Tantal, over the Atlantic Ocean, but it was not quite as far into the Americas. So I believe it was in or near to Cuba. The leaders were 4 in total. Peyossa, male. Sabuk, also male. Tiazir, female. And Jeffnut, female. They were in charge of the institution that covered all aspects of water. Peyossa specialized in seawater. There were several subsets of his area as well. Sabuk, rivers. Tiazir specialized in freshwater bodies, like lakes. And finally, Jeffnut was rain and groundwater. The university started the same as the others in Tantal, but once the studies developed further, a base was set up in an area where both seawater and freshwater was abundant. Caves were found under the ocean that had a large pocket of air and a freshwater spring. They wanted to see if it was possible, maybe prove if it was possible, to live in such an environment, to be able to replenish the air, grow plants, and essentially live in that sort of environment. Some caves were widened and made more comfortable. Lighting was put in place, and the scientists and students were required to live on site. It was one of the more unusual institutions, as it was small, had no town with it, and was obviously not very easy to get to. My next place of education was Neith. many years after my education, I went to live in Neith, but that's another story. Anyway, Neith was all about food. It was the Institute for Nutrition and Agriculture. The leaders were Wusia, male, and of course Neith, female, Dodo, female, and I'm pretty sure it was located in Greece, where Athens is today, and it was a very nice place. But my next place of study after that, I was really looking forward to, because it took me back to Tantal. It was the University of Medicine. It was located on the outer ring of Tantal, so it was a fair distance from there to where my parents lived. So I stayed at the university. The leaders were very serious people, so much more serious than any of the other universities, including the philosophers. The leaders were Api, male, Thom, female, and Meno, female. Each had their own speciality. Api was in control of the study of medicine, mortality, and longevity. Thom was in control of the study of justice and morality, especially in relation to primitives and animals, pets, also DNA manipulation, that sort of thing. Meno was in charge of the study of the mind, so that covered memory, knowledge, learning, that sort of thing. The time spent at that university was very interesting, but really not my kind of thing. After my time there, it was a welcome relief to move into the Institute of Enjoyment. Great name, huh? The Institute of Enjoyment was, it's more serious than it sounds, because it covered what we would call the arts, but it also covered so much more than that. It was the study of everything enjoyable, so visual arts, entertainment, music, jewelry, fashion, makeup, alcohol, beer, wine, and even hallucinatory drugs. So the people in charge, there was Bessa, who's male, and Hat, who was female. And it was located in Tantal, and it was on the middle ring. So it was pretty close to everything, and it was so full of life. It was a really wonderful place. So the 10 years I spent there went really quickly, so quickly it only felt like a year. By the time I had to move to the next university, I was quite sad to be leaving Tantal again. The next place was really amazing. It was the Institute of Primitive and Animal Studies, which was run by Bella of Venn. So this is a different Bella to the Bella of Kron. So he was male, obviously, and then there was Best, female, and Nibs, male. The main base was near to one of the largest communities of primitives, but there were many locations used by the Institute, and they were all around the world for people working in that field, for the watchers. 2 more universities were left after that in order for me to complete my education, and it's taken me a while to record this episode because of the next university. I mentioned it briefly at the start. The university was called Lim, and it was a really crazy place, and I am reluctant to share at this stage the details of this university because they are so unbelievable. But I will do eventually, because I want to be absolutely complete with all of my dreams and memories. I'll just mention what Lim was about. and who it was run by. So it was actually run by Uran's wife, Haya, and also a guy by the name of Shu. It was unusual, and its field of interest was things like weather, tide, wind, tectonics, mapping, earth sciences in general. I had many wonderful dreams about Lim, so I do plan to do an episode, and it should be quite surprising for everyone who listens to my channel. Anyway, moving on to the last place of my education. It was actually in one of my early episodes. It was the episode called The Crook Without the Flail. And the place, it was called Feeb. It was the University of Celestial Movement, basically astronomy. So studied the moon, the night sky, everything like that. And it was located between white chalk cliffs. And I have a feeling that it might be the UK or maybe Doggerland. I was in the UK a while back, visiting a place called Margate, and the white cliffs there were so strikingly similar to my dream. I was a little bit stunned. Anyway, Feeb was named after one of its leaders, called Feeb. She's a female, and there was another leader called Kos, male, who was the husband of Feeb. Anyway, so that was the final of the universities, and so at the conclusion of my education, I had the joy of experiencing the knowing celebration. It's the equivalent of a graduation. So upon graduating, you receive a collar of recognition, and the collars are something that I should also do an episode on, because you can combine them, and it tells other people who you are and what you've done. So the graduation ceremony was at the Great Institute, and of course my brother, Uran, was the one handing out the collars. I knew he was pleased to see me graduate. I just didn't know at the time that he had some pretty big plans for me. But you'll hear about those in the episodes to come. Anyway, thanks for listening, everyone. If anyone would like to know more about anything that I talked about today, please let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I will see you next time. Bye.